Honorable St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to share some thoughts on these proposed amendments, but in doing so, perhaps to restate, as the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, the Honourable Attorney General has done, what is in fact clear for the Parliament to see, which is that this is an amendment to the Road Traffic Act. This conversation can be, and perhaps should be, situated in that context. Sir, to the extent that, and I set aside whatever other purposes or ultimate purposes the government has determined this legislation, to which this legislation will contribute. Setting aside those other purposes, the fact is that one of the things I have certainly heard in this conversation from the public is no one knows what is the level of tint that is acceptable. That is a road traffic legislation conversation. And so I consider that it is not out of order to bring clarity to that question. That it is not out of order to bring clarity to the question, sir, I have a tint shop in Halls Road. I have them in other places across the constituency, and there are other places across St. Michael. It is not out of order or out of the question that a government should seek to bring clarity to that question. So perhaps let us start there. And these amendments seek to bring clarity to that question. Sir, the question of good order and predictability on our roads will arguably contribute to a number of goals. I am concerned today, sir, with the overall question of citizen security and citizen safety that is made possible through these amendments. The Attorney General has offered one potential outcome or impact on citizen security and safety. And to the extent that I am not an expert on these matters, I will not trespass on these matters. But I am interested in the question of good order on our roads. And that is what road traffic legislation, as we have come to know it in Barbados, concerns itself with. When it comes to the question of tint, I will tell you, as somebody who will walk about a lot in St. Michael, South Central, and other places, that one point of usefulness I see has simply to do with communication between a pedestrian and a driver, communication between drivers on the road. Sir, this has happened to perhaps every Barbadian that walks around. You stop, even at a pedestrian crossing or otherwise, a driver is telling you, hurry up, come along across. Sir, I don't move unless I can see you. Unless I can see how you are communicating with me, I'm not going to take that step. And so, setting aside whatever other purposes the government has determined that this may support, let us talk about this as a matter of good order and predictability for Barbadians on the road as road users. But sir, apart from this question, there is arguably an entire suite of action that falls under or falls within the context of this legislation that must come together with amendments such as these to give real life to the question of citizen security and citizen safety. And this is perhaps one of the matters on the edge of that question. The matters that I consider to be at the heart of that question have, for example, to do with things like introduction of the breathalyzer test. Now, there are Barbadians who may consider these amendments and say, fine, I have no issue with these amendments. But further to these amendments, how is our safety being protected by ensuring that the people who get behind the wheel every day are of sound mind and capable to operate a vehicle safely on the road? Sir, there's the question of the increasing use of mobile phones, which is already in the law, but perhaps what happens to us all as Barbadians is that we start to fall back a bit from the standard. Sir, when seatbelt laws were first introduced in Barbados, there was an uproar. When we insisted that people wear helmets to operate certain vehicles, there was an uproar. But Barbadians, understanding the good sense of these changes and the extent to which it will protect them and their loved ones, complied and kept that compliance at a high level. Perhaps less so with the mobile phone usage. And my colleagues in here may raise an eyebrow at me, because I am sure that some of us may be guilty, as busy as we are, being sought for conversations from our constituents as often as we are, may sometimes let it slip. But the fact is that that moment of distraction on the road is perhaps a moment that leads to an unfortunate outcome through injury or death to oneself or to someone else. And so the question of introduction of a breathalyzer, that especially as the crop over season is approaching, helps keep us safe on the road, is one that, while Barbadians submit to this legislation to give clarity on the level of tint that is acceptable as a way to improve their safety, may also see that the introduction of the breathalyzer is perhaps a more robust way to be able to do that. I realize that we have normalized going to a karaoke and having a drink and getting in our cars. We used to normalize a lot of things that we since had to set aside and abandon in order to keep ourselves and our families safe. And so making sure that we are not under the influence of anything, alcohol or otherwise, before we operate a vehicle, is something that I believe that we are at the point of having to introduce. I am aware, as a member on the government side, of all of the reasons for the delays. I am not sure that bringing some regulation and regularity to fees in the taxi sector now stands as enough of a defense. I think we have to get on with it. I think often about the burden of enforcement that the Barbados Police Service has on its shoulders. The burden of enforcement is tremendous. We have heard from the Honorable Attorney General about the issues with attracting new recruits to the service. We have seen the work that the government has done to bring a sort of quasi-policing capacity through island constables and others to be able to pick up some of that slack. And so enforcement is a challenge for us across every sector where enforcement is required. Nonetheless, when it comes to making sure that motorists are operating their vehicles safely, it is something on which we have to insist. But sir, the question of good order and predictability on our roads extends, I believe, beyond the safety of pedestrians and communicating with motorists and making sure they can see them, make eye contact with them, beyond the introduction of the breathalyzer that is long past due, beyond making sure that people are not operating mobile phones in ways that are at odds with regulations that we have established. But it also has, quite frankly, to do with other areas of predictability that keep the country turning over. So recently, we saw the announcement from the Barbados Revenue Authority that there was now a new way to renew your vehicle registration, what we used to call the road tax disc. And you do it online. It is a simple process, and it has been long in coming, and I'm sure Barbadians are thankful for it. But it seems, and this is as reported to me by my constituents on whose behalf I speak in here today, that this has now been overtaken by another bit of nuisance, which is to say that when it comes to transferring ownership on vehicles 10 years and older are to be inspected in the Pine by Licensing Authority inspectors. I seem to recall that this same Road Traffic Act was amended previously to establish certain garages and so on who could be authorized to do these kinds of inspections. I am not sure how that aligns with this, what seems like a practice of vehicles 10 years and older being inspected by Licensing Authority inspectors at the Pine location, and this being applied to change of ownership of vehicles. Now, the reason that we took this step, that the government took this step to authorize certain garages to do it, had to do with the capacity issue at Licensing Authority. And so, if it means then that for vehicles 10 years and older that are changing ownership, that they must go to the Licensing Authority, then that removes the usefulness of that amendment. Because it means that the bottleneck that we once saw would then be reintroduced. But I want to speak to another part of this issue, which is that there seems to be, and I put this here as a question that perhaps the responsible ministers, well, minister and the Honourable Member for St. Andrew, who works in that ministry, may wish to clarify for the public, which is that there also seems to be a practice or a habit of vehicles not passing inspection for things that really are not questions of the roadworthiness of the vehicle. So, for example, a constituent who advised me that he was told to paint his bumper because it was not attractive to the eye. There are structural issues in vehicles that mean that they are not roadworthy, that they are likely not to function on the road and cause issues. And then there are cosmetic issues that arguably a person who is hanging on to an old vehicle that they finished paying for, that they can't afford a new one, that they're just trying to keep on the road running so that they can do their work, cannot then be expected to go and come out of pocket to make it look pretty. So we have to be able to separate the questions of real roadworthiness from the questions of presentability that you might expect from public service vehicles. And so to the extent that we are today discussing a road traffic amendment bill, these are the kinds of things that are worthy of clarification to the public. Sir, the question of signage and making sure that people see and know clearly where they are going. You know, I don't know if we realize that signage is there to assist the road user. Signage is not just there so that when we are taking a stroll, we can say, oh, look, that's Baycroft Road. If you were looking for Baycroft Road, you won't find it because the Baycroft Road sign is today on the ground by a broken culvert that presents a risk to the people who use the area. The Royal Court sign is equally on the ground. My neighbor from St. Michael South may be interested to know, because that is close to him, in my constituency, but close to him. I raise these things not just to give a list of maintenance issues related to signage, but signage is a matter of predictability for road users. If I am driving and looking for where to turn, it happens to all of us. You are driving behind somebody, and you say, but this woman driving very strange. They're like, they know where they're going. They're looking for the sign. These are fundamental bread and butter issues that contribute to good order on our roads and contribute to citizen security and citizen safety. Sir, I seem to recall that some time ago, and I will be short because this is really an intervention related to the suite of things, the package of measures that keep people safe. It's not just one thing. It's not just one thing. And I think that that's the point the Honorable Attorney General was trying to make in his own presentation related to law and order. My presentation, sir, relates to general citizen security and safety on the streets of this country as made possible through the Road Traffic Act. I seem to recall that we had once discussed a point system for road traffic infractions. And what does that mean? That rather than having a complicated court system, anybody who has owned or operated ZRs would know. And it is perhaps a bit of an experience for which I am thankful. But many people who used to be in the business of operating public service vehicles and who have gotten out of the business of operating public service vehicles, ask any of us, is that having to maintain your good standing before the law is difficult if you're an owner of a public service vehicle. It should be difficult because there should be, by now, a point system where for every infraction, you are removing points that go against your license to own or operate. Just as in other jurisdictions, you lose points that eventually mean that you are no longer able to drive. You lose the right to have a driver's license and operate a vehicle on the road. And so, taken all together, these measures contribute to the safety of Barbadians and those who use our roads. But it is not just a question of tint. So introducing this amendment, though it may be useful, so that I could see the person who's telling me to cross the road and not take for granted that the fact that his tires are rolling more slowly means that he's telling me to cross, because that is an accident waiting to happen quite literally. But to the extent that giving predictability to motorists, giving predictability to those who make their living by working with vehicles and providing tint to vehicles, to the extent that this has to be a part of a package that includes regulating and enforcing when it comes to the use of mobile phones and other distractions in a vehicle. Maintaining good, clear, readable signage so that people are not feeling in the dark, which is a habit that itself causes accidents. Being able to properly introduce and enforce a point system for traffic infractions. Being able to clarify the issue of whether we are really using garages for inspection of older vehicles and what really are the roadworthiness requirements for an older vehicle. This is not a question of cosmetic presentation because it is not a public service vehicle. And if my old car can run and it look old, well, let my old car run, because not everybody can afford a slick vehicle to operate on the road. As long as it is safe, let it run. Being able, sir, to finally, once and for all, introduce the breathalyzer test even if it is on a pilot basis. Some years ago, I was in Trinidad for Carnival, many years ago now. And one of the things that was accepted and was common was that as you are going to one of the specific parties where that you have to drive a long way to get to, you will expect to be stopped and tested. Because we know the spirit of Carnival, we know the spirit of crop over. Fete to fete to fete to fete. And sometimes you don't check yourself to see if you're good. But let the authorities do it. And if we start, and if people know that at any minute they can expect it, then it starts to change behavior. Sir, it is time. There are too many accidents happening on the road that we cannot explain. There are too many walkers and runners and cyclists moving at 3:30 and 4 o'clock in the morning for exercise who are afraid because what? That is the time people are coming home from fetes. It is time for us to be able to explain and to hold people accountable. It doesn't mean that we lose the character of our Barbados, but I'll tell you what, you might go to a fete near home if you want to drink, because you might have to walk home. You do a lot less damage that way. Just walk in a straight line and go home, if you can make it. But don't get behind the wheel. That is not cultural, and I will not accept that it is cultural. Oh, Bajans is no if they're drunk. Unless you have a different body than the rest of the population on earth, no, you don't know when you're drunk. No, you don't know when you're on the under the influence of any other substance. You don't know. Somebody has to tell you. And eventually, once we introduce these kinds of changes, people will start to get a better sense of safety and security because there is good order on our roads, and that is what this legislation supports. Sir, I'm obliged to you.